As fate would have it, two men with a love of superheroes and monster movies would be placed on the same development team as part of the Capcom Five. Five development teams, all working towards the same goal. Work with us, Nintendo asked of these five teams, and help us create compelling games for the Nintendo Gamecube. And with that, Hideki Kamiya and Atsushi Inaba put their heads together and channeled their sheer love into today's topic, Viewtiful Joe. Today we'll be looking back at this unique side-scrolling beat-em-up as part of a larger discussion about Kamiya, Inaba, and the Capcom Five itself. So stick around and join us for our spandex-clad look at Viewtiful Joe on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 96th episode of our Video Game Nostalgia podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we tell you a story about one game relevant to the current week in gaming history. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the game, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. This week, we are looking back at the story of Viewtiful Joe, originally released for the GameCube on June 26, 2003. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co host who has a thing for men in masks and spandex. It's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, how long have you been into tokusatsu films and shows for that matter?
Well, Dave, it's amazing how much pride these men have. I just don't know if I could do that myself, and it's just something to look into. Just something to look up to.
Pride.
Just I mean, just to be able to do that, to have that inside of you, to be, yes, I can wear spandex. I
Yeah,
mean, but then I guess if you're wearing a mask, it's not so bad.
that's true. I never thought of that.
I mean, I also was a wrestler with a singlet, which is
Ooh, yeah, yeah. I. It's a debate between the wrestling or tokusatsu. I don't
a little
know.
bit. Yeah,
You can wrestle in tokusatsu.
that you can.
What you been
Hmm.
playing this week?
Well, Dave, this week has been Rocket League and RuneScape and a short amount of Raft.
Oh, you tried to play that, huh?
I played a couple hours because a friend talked me into it. But yeah, no. Other than that, it's been pretty light week for gaming as it was last week. So, how about yourself?
I think just Rocket League and some Fall Guys.
Hmm.
I think that's it.
Interesting.
I don't. Maybe I played 10 minutes of Cyberpunk this week, like while waiting for something to heat up in the oven. But it has not been a very substantial gaming week for me whatsoever. So, but we are here to talk about Viewtiful Joe. Have you played Viewtiful Joe before?
I have not played the game before. I did get to see a couple of friends play it growing up and in college, but I never myself played through the game, so I only know what it looks like and how it plays to some degree.
Gotcha. I can honestly say the same. I remember the hype around it. I remember people playing it. It just never got to me for whatever reason. Then, but that's okay. That's all right. We are still capable of telling its story, right? Right.
I believe so, Dave.
So at a young age, Hideki Kamiya had a neighbor who would frequently invite him over to play video games on his Epic Cassette Vision console. Now, we've never really talked about the Epic Cassette Vision console. It's a second generation Japanese console. It was comparable in power to our Atari 2600, but it didn't have separate joysticks. It was kind of one of those original, like, self contained units where the joysticks were built into the console itself, so it was one unit. It had a variety of games. It was like a 12 in 1 kind of console. It's basically what we know to be a pretty standard representation of the early consoles. Now, it was actually the best selling console in Japan until Nintendo came out with their family computer, also known as the Famicom, also known in stateside as the Nintendo Entertainment System. So it was the winner prior to that. So I guess in that respect, it was like the Atari 2600 too, you know?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, not that I have much experience with that either, but
No, but it was definitely the system to have before the Nintendo came out. Um, I mean, don't get me wrong, we have the ColecoVisions, the Intellivisions, and all the others, but Atari was the big one. Atari won the 2600 won that generation of consoles and rode it into the ground until Nintendo pulled us out of the depths after the video game crash. You know, so um, Kamiya really first fell in love with gaming due to the sounds that the console produced. That was it. He liked the beeps and the blips and the bloops. Now, as a child, he was also into monster movies and shows, kind of like Godzilla, Ultraman. Those are two of his big inspirations. When he was in junior high or junior school, it's junior school to them, it's junior high for us. His family bought, I mean, what's next is the Nintendo Famicom. So they bought a Famicom, and the first game he remembers buying was a puzzle platform game for the Nintendo called Nuts and Milk, which I have nothing else for you about Nuts and Milk.
wow.
I mean, I looked it up, but it's a puzzle platform game with a funny name. So,
That's a very interesting name.
yep. In high school, Kamiya bought a NEC PC, which was one of the big PCs back then, to study programming. But like most of us that buy PCs intending to do something else on it, he really ended up only playing video games on it every day. Guilty. His
Wow.
favorite games growing up are some of our greatest hits. They include Castlevania, Space Harrier, Punch Out, Wonder Boy and Monster Land, Snatcher, and Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Oh, that's some of those I know.
Some of those you know.
I'm not really sure what Snatcher
It's a
or
cyberpunk game, if I'm not mistaken, from back then. I don't know if it was stateside. Space Harrier, do you know?
sounds like a jet in space.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Wonder Boy and Monsterland was a Sega Master System platform game. It was kind of like the game for the Sega Master System, which was their system prior to the Genesis. Yeah, here. So at some point after this, Kamiya was reading an interview in Family Computer Magazine that featured game creators Shigeru Miyamoto, who we've talked about continuously. He is the creator of Mario, among other um, storied franchises. He was the face of Nintendo for years. And it also featured Masanobu Endo, who is best known for helping create Xevious, the side-scrolling shooter, and the Tower of Jiraga, which was a another another staple of the early gaming. This article basically inspired Kamiya to become a game designer. So he goes to college, and after college, he decides that he wants to apply for jobs at various game development companies. He was turned down by some. Sega, for instance, told him no. Namco actually offered him a job as an artist, but he wanted to be a game designer, so he held out. And in 1994, he was hired by Capcom to be a game designer. And early on in his career at Capcom, he was given the job as one of the game planners of the original Resident Evil. So, got a good start, right?
I would definitely say so. Yeah.
After
Wow.
his work on Resident Evil, he was asked to be the director of Resident Evil 2. I will
Um.
spare the details of what happened because I'd like to do an episode on RE2 one day, but its development was not a perfect process, and he eventually was asked to step back and become a producer on the game, while where another team took it to completion. Um, Even still, after that whole boondoggle was finished and Resident Evil 2 was released to the world, he was still held in high regard and was asked to become the director of the first Devil May Cry. So that's like one of your favorite series.
Jesus.
I know, right? Um, Again, I'd like to do a series on the first Devil May Cry, but if you didn't actually know this little fun fact, Devil May Cry was supposed to be a new entry in the Resident Evil series. It was actually supposed to be and planned to be Resident Evil 4, but as they, to sum it up real quickly, as they worked on it, they realized that their story wasn't really fit for the Resident Evil universe, and it was repurposed as Devil May Cry. But we'll save the details of that story for Devil May Cry, because it's really fascinating. And that
Wow.
brings us to the Capcom 5. Rob, you ever heard of the Capcom 5 before?
I have not, Dave. No.
It's like it sounds like some bunch of bad guys, infamous bad guys.
Or maybe the good guys.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we are kind of talking about a superhero today. So, November of 2002, Capcom held a surprise press conference and they announced a series of games that are now known as, and well, not now, back then and now, they're known as the Capcom 5. These are five titles that Capcom I feel like that's redundant now that I said it out loud. The Capcom 5. There are actually six games. There are five titles that Capcom was planning on developing exclusively for the GameCube. Now, the GameCube had been out for about a year at that point. It was actually released back in, I think, stateside November of 2001, if I'm not mistaken. So it was literally out about a year at that point. And it really wasn't selling up to Nintendo's expectations. And if you're curious what that looks like, I checked. Its first year, it sold about 4.7 million consoles, but that wasn't up to stuff with what they wanted. So Nintendo goes to third-party developers and they say, "Hey, guys, we're Nintendo. Y'all are doing wonders with the PS2, the PlayStation 2. Come work with us and help us, bolster sales for the GameCube. Come do the same for the GameCube, basically." Now, during the earlier console generations, Capcom and Nintendo were honestly thick as thieves. We've covered Capcom before. Mega Man, which we did a previous episode on, was developed by Capcom, and that was one of the biggest selling games on the NES. And really, to further the point, back in that generation, the Nintendo generation, Nintendo as a company had a stranglehold on the console market, which really didn't give third party developers much choice in the matter. Now, we've talked about that vaguely before when we covered unlicensed consoles. I believe that was the Wisdom Tree episode we did earlier this year. But everyone wanted to work with Nintendo because if they didn't, they were going to get left behind. And so, they did. And then, like I said, Capcom just had a really great relationship with them because Mega Man had ended up being a big smashing hit. But then the Sega Genesis came out, and that changed things. And things changed even further in 1995 when Sony came out with the PlayStation. The disc based format that the PlayStation used was way better for developers than the cartridge based hardware that Nintendo insisted on using constantly. First in their NES, then the Super Nintendo, and then here in the Nintendo 64 era, which is what competed against the PlayStation. The cartridges were limited in memory compared to optical discs, the CDs that the PlayStation and then DVDs that the PS2 used. And if there's anything we do know about Nintendo, it's that if you're going to do something with Nintendo, you're going to pay to do something with Nintendo. So the cartridges were also expensive because developers had to pay Nintendo for permission to use a console. Nintendo probably manufactured all the consoles. And so because of this, Nintendo really fell out of favor with third-party developers as we worked our way through those couple generations of consoles. Now, this is probably one of the reasons that the GameCube is disc based. Even if it wasn't CDs or DVDs, it was still optical discs. It was tiny discs. That was likely a compromise in Nintendo's eyes. But here we are. We're here in the GameCube era, and Nintendo isn't selling very well. And so they went to third-party developers and they basically said, "Hey, we need some help. Let's do this." And so the Capcom Five was basically Nintendo going to Capcom and asking them for help, and them agreeing. So let's look really quickly at the Capcom Five. Rob, have you ever heard of PN03 before?
I do not believe that sounds familiar whatsoever to me, Dave.
Cool. It was a science fiction themed third person shooter. That's really all I have to say about it. How about Killer 7?
Nope. Negative.
Oh, man. So Killer 7 was a pretty cool action adventure game that had first person shooter elements, but also was a rail shooter. And I know that sounds like a really weird mishmash, but the art style was really cool. And it was actually a really good game. IGN actually once named it the best game that no one ever played. Killer 7 was a halfway decent game. How about Resident Evil 4? You ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't heard of that one either.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's a over the shoulder shooter. I don't know, some survival horror game. Probably one of the most famous survival horror franchises, and that specific one is probably one of the most requested fan favorite. I'd say it's probably one of the fan favorites in the whole franchise, honestly. And they keep freaking releasing it. They just did it in VR, which is pretty cool.
Oh, wow. I actually didn't know about the VR release.
You didn't know there was a Resident Evil 4 VR?
I did not. I haven't looked too much into VR.
It's one of the big, highly recommended VR titles right now.
I'll have to check it out.
There was also a 3D shoot 'em up called Dead Phoenix. Coincidentally, it lived up to its name halfway because it was canceled before it ever saw the light of day. Unlike the Phoenix, though, it did not rise from the ashes, and there's no Dead Phoenix game. And then lastly, we have the topic of today's discussion, which is Viewtiful Joe. So the team that worked on Viewtiful Joe was called Team Viewtiful. Really creative, right?
Yeah.
It was going to, for sake of argument, if anyone's wondering, it is also known as Clover Studio. It wasn't officially called Clover Studio until Viewtiful Joe 2, but we're really not quite there yet. So here it was Team Viewtiful. And our boy Kamiya was the director put on the team. Now, the producer that was put on the team was Atsushi Inaba. Now, Inaba had worked with Kamiya on Devil May Cry. He has a credit on Devil May Cry for what's called technical cooperation. After working on Devil May Cry, he was hired on as the producer of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, which we've covered in a previous episode. Also, its sequel, Attorney for All or something like that, the second one in the series he produced as well. And he was also the producer of Steel Battalion, which we've never done an episode on. Steel Battalion, if I'm correct, is a mech game, if I remember correctly. Don't hold me to that.
Yeah, I don't know on that one.
Now, Atsushi Inaba was a lifelong fan of superheroes, and he was looking to make a video game that combined American comic books with traditional Japanese tokusatsu. So, tokusatsu, for those of you who don't know, this will be our learning thing for the day, is, Rob, do you know tokusatsu?
Nope, that's not a name I'm familiar with, Dave.
Tokusatsu is a Japanese term for live action films or television dramas that make heavy use of practical special effects. So the
Wow,
most
almost like we talked about that at the beginning of the episode.
I know, right? So the most well-known examples of tokusatsu outside of Japan are the Godzilla movies and the Power Rangers. Other examples, more so on the Japanese side, include Ultraman and all the rest of the kaiju movies, which are giant monster movies. These include Mothra and Gamera. And when you look at this game, it's very easy to see this inspiration As normal, I always encourage you go on YouTube and look at a playthrough. But Beautiful Joe himself is very much looks like an Ultraman, and the game is laid out like a comic book. It's got some really awesome 3D cel shaded graphics. It's a 2D side scrolling game, and even the story is inspired by tokusatsu. In fact, it's part of the story. So, as it goes in the beginning, Joe and his girlfriend are watching a tokusatsu drama at the movies starring a character called Captain Blue. At one point, the villain just seems to defeat Captain Blue, upon which he reaches out of the screen and pulls Joe's girlfriend in. Joe gets sucked in the commotion. I think he's brought in by Captain Blue, and then he's given a device which allows him to transform into a superhero and has to fight his way through a bunch of villains to save her, which is basically the plot of a tokusatsu drama. So the game itself is very meta in that respect, in that it is one, it's part of one, and it's inspired by it. So there you go. Now, originally, when they were working on Viewtiful Joe, the development team, they started out with only 6 people, and they were working under a 12-month deadline. But as the game progressed, the team grew and the deadline got pushed out. It ended up taking about 21 months to complete with 100 some odd people, but complete it they did. And Viewtiful Joe was released for the GameCube on June 26, 2003. Now, for those of you that have never played Viewtiful Joe, it's a traditional side scrolling beat 'em up game. You move left, right, up or down on it's a beat 'em up. Beat 'em ups are, I don't know, Double Dragon, Turtles, um, Streets of Rage, those are all beat 'em ups, right? I think I got them all. You have enemies that come at you from all directions. You can punch, kick, dodge them. You also have these cool VFX powers, which are designed to emulate camera tricks that you see in films. You can slow down time. You can move really fast. When you slow down time, your reflexes get better. You can dodge attacks more easily. When you speed up, you create multiple images of yourself, which allows you to um, unleash a flurry of attacks on enemies all over the screen. And then the last power you gain as you go through the game is zooming in. It causes a little the camera zooms in on Joe, and then his normal attacks are more powerful, and he gets some new attacks, some specific to that mode. So and then you defeat the enemies to get little dollars or V bucks or V marks. I forgot what they're called, beautifuls maybe, and you can use that to upgrade your. You can buy new abilities, buy new weapons, more health, and so on and so forth. It's just it's Beautiful Joe, right? Rob, what do you remember about the game?
I remember that it had a very unique art style, and I thought it was incredible because it was like a comic book. It was all of the different scenes. Just it literally was just like a constant moving drawing. Um, the combos. It was really cool the way you didn't block, but you avoided hits, and then the combos that you could do.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, they used a cell shaded. It's a 3D cell. It's a 2D side scrolling game, but it's done in a 3D cell shaded art style. And cell shading is, when it's done correctly, it's always a great look. What's a really popular cell shaded game? Borderlands, for instance, is cell shaded. Done, it looks completely different, but it's still cell shaded. It's the first one that popped into mind. Well, that's that Beautiful Joe. Rob, what did people think about Beautiful Joe?
well, Dave, we'll start off with our critic reviews as always,
Okay.
and with that, we're going to start off with a review from GamePro magazine, where Pong Sifu called Beautiful Joe frantic, exhilarating, and addictive.
Okay.
He writes that its heart, Beautiful Joe is a retro flavored remix of beat 'em up and platformer, which Capcom has catapulted into the 21st century by infusing them with spellblindedly art direction, relentless manic energy, and unique gameplay mechanics. He ultimately calls the game a powerful effort, with its only flaws being its threadbare adolescent fantasy plot and short duration. Anything to say there, Dave?
Yeah, I was gonna say something about how I don't feel like the game is short, but I never played it. I don't really know. I only know that from what others say. Never mind. Move on.
I mean, I know for a fact that at a world, I mean, I don't know if it's a world record at this point, but I know that a speed run can be completed in about 35 minutes and a long play about 3.5, 4 hours. So, I mean,
For one playthrough.
if I'm not, yeah, it was. Yes, absolutely, one playthrough.
Gotcha.
I don't know why I didn't think otherwise. Yes, I just watched a speed run recently at 35 minutes. Although
Wow,
I didn't finish the long play, it was about 340. And considering that the speed run was 35 minutes, I'm assuming that it could be the entire game in 4 hours for someone just doing it casually.
that's crazy. 35 minutes to beat this game.
I mean, yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I suppose when you're used to some games being like under a minute, that's where it's like, oh,
True statement.
but still, no, it's absolutely incredible that it's 35 minutes.
Hmm. Cool.
Cool, cool. So next up we have Jeff Gertzman, who in his review for GameSpot says that Viewtiful Joe is part of a slow makeover that the action genre has been getting over the past few years, with Devil May Cry leading the charge. He writes that it definitely delivers a fantastic cel-shaded look, which also added a really great series of unique gameplay twists that make the game much, much better than just an average side-scrolling action game. He calls the gameplay very exciting in an action game that offers much more lasting value than most, clocking in at about 15 hours on average.
I wonder if that's playing it over and over again because I think couldn't you unlock characters and stuff? So maybe 4 hours is one playthrough and 15 is everything.
Perhaps, yeah. Or I mean, maybe the long play was just a short amount of the game.
Cool.
I had never played it myself, so I could only speculate.
All right.
Continues on by saying the graphics are anything but stale, whereas the over the top comic like appearance works really well with the superhero theme. All in all, the look of the game is unique and well done, equally impressive in both art and technique. In the end, he calls Viewtiful Joe a really impressive achievement. It managed to simultaneously recall the similar times of 2D platforming action games while modernizing the genre in several major ways. It has an incredible look to it and enough depth to keep you wanting to play even after one playthrough.
There you go. That answers the question. Guess he played it over and over and over again.
I suppose so, Dave. So, in his article for IGN, Corey D. Lewis writes that with Viewtiful Joe, your time has come to awaken the harness within. It has a tight focus on side scrolling action mixed with Capcom's wavy yet curiously cool 2D art style that keeps both old school action gamers and newcomers both glued to Viewtiful Joe. All in all, he calls the game one of the most action packed and genuinely entertaining games he has played in a long time on any system, and an effort that Capcom should be proud of. He says it's hard to fault the game in any one particular area other than its slightly flat story, because most everything else has already been polished to perfection. Graphics, gameplay, and lasting appeal are nailed to make Viewtiful Joe truly fun. Beating this game is a badge of honor to wear with pride, and he plans on playing it through several more times to see if he's still man enough to call himself a gamer.
Well, that's a little dramatic, perhaps, but I'm glad he likes the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Dave, I think that's enough about the critics. Because as most of our listeners are, I mean, some of them may be professional video game critics. I have no
Ooh,
idea, and if you
yeah,
are, that's awesome.
maybe.
But the majority of us are just your average folk. So let's hear from other average folk.
Okay.
So first up on Metacritic, we have Joe D, who writes that in an age obsessed with photorealistic graphics, It's great to see a developer take a chance and come up with such a brilliant title. Gorgeous visuals, challenging and intuitive gameplay, and combos that would make Neo piss his pants.
Okay.
For God's sake, you can slow down time and punch bullets back at whoever is trying to cap you. Buy Viewtiful Joe. You won't regret it.
I don't know if that is supposed to be a review that is talking about how much Beautiful Joe is a stellar accomplishment or just a scathing hatred for the Matrix series. I'm not honestly sure.
I mean, he's just saying he's better than Neo. I don't. Well, where does the hatred for Matrix come in? I mean, that's you're reading between some pretty thin lines there, Dave.
Alrighty, fair enough.
Well, next up we have Ian C from Metacritic, who calls Beautiful Joe magnificent. He says it's an old school platform fun with wonderful rapid kung fu antics, astounding graphics, and the time control that is, well, spectacular and spectacularly entertaining to make use of. What could turn into staid, boring little scraps can become awe inspiring mini epics, particularly when you tune your fingers to the intuitive controls and lay and can lay waste to a single group of bad guys with an eye-watering combination of slow-mo bullet time, flipping and kicking, a high-speed torrent on fast forward, and finishing off with a zoom in and super 360-degree kick. This game is exactly what I love Nintendo for. Fun, fun, and fun.
Okay, well, I guess he likes Nintendo because it's fun
And fun.
and fun.
Ah, right you are, Dave. Ian finishes saying, hesitate not. Buy now. Oh, yes, and please confine this Mario for President, Prime Minister, King of World baby talk nonsense to the schoolyard.
I don't remember that. I was Mario running for president at one point.
I don't recall that being a thing, but honestly, I think are we can it really get much worse?
True statement. All right.
So maybe Mario will bring back some. Maybe he'll create the Mushroom Kingdom, and then we can at least just live lives in fun fueled fantasies.
Yeah, there you go. There,
Oh,
that's the way to
jeez.
look at it. There you go.
Oh man. Anywho, next up we should take a listen to Stuart L on Metacritic, and quite frankly, he's not nearly as big a fan of this game. He writes that this game is highly overrated. The graphics look like crap.
Mm.
The control scheme is okay. The plot is bland. And the game's just far too repetitive, with each level being more or less the same thing. Also, the abilities are introduced way too early in the game, leading to everything after a certain point being the same exact thing with few variations and puzzles. Don't believe anything you hear about this game. Give it a rental at least, but I don't think it's worth even that.
I love how he hates everything that everyone else loves. It's got to be a troll, but who knows?
I
Different
mean,
different strokes for different folks.
I'm gonna say I'm not gonna believe anything from that review because Stuart specifically said don't believe anything you hear about this game,
Oh,
and
there you
that's
go.
there's an entire review on it. So I guess I can't believe anything about it.
Good, good.
So
That's good.
swoop, gone. I forgot about. We didn't even hear it. But Stuart, your opinion's valid if you're listening. So last up, Dave, we have Jog to. I have no idea.
Yeah, joggle,
Joggle.
joggle. We'll go joggle.
Okay. So, Dave, last up, we have Joggle on Metacritic, who would prefer to take the middle ground, writing that as I started playing the game, I felt interested by what seemed to be a refreshing idea. But it didn't take long to realize that even though it is far more innovative than an average game, the gameplay is extremely repetitive, and fighting is based on repeating the same moves over and over again. If it were beneficial to use different superpowers all the time, to get the best results, it would be far, far more satisfying. And when you add the tedious puzzles that even sometimes lack logic, the annoyingly quiet dialogue, and other flaws in design, the personal touch just doesn't save it from its shortcomings. They finished saying I would give it a 4, but I had to give one extra point for its personal touch. Therefore, 5 out of 10.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they almost gave it a 4, but hey, 5 out of 10 is definitely the middle ground.
5 out of 10 for sure. Well, I guess I guess people really had a love or hate relationship with this game. It was, I guess, a mild commercial success. They really didn't have high standards, or expectations for any of these games. It sold about 275,000 copies on the GameCube and only about 46,000 copies on the PlayStation 2 when it was ported over later. It did win a ton of awards when it was released, though. It was, best GameCube game here and there, best design game, best character. So, I mean, critics seem to generally like it, and it got a lot of recognition. But for whatever reason, that didn't really translate into sales. Actually, I could probably answer that. I mean, the GameCube never was a smashing success, so there's your GameCube sales. And by the time it was ported over the PS2, who knows what was going on there? But it was successful enough to start a franchise. We got Beautiful Joe 2 a year later, and then a year after that, I think in 2005, we got Red Hot Rumble, Beautiful Joe Red Hot Rumble, and Beautiful Joe Double Trouble for later consoles. you know, Kamiya doesn't work for Capcom anymore, but in interviews, he has been repeatedly quoted as saying that he wouldn't mind working on, another game in the series, and also has been caught slipping in saying that he would like to bring the whole series to the Switch. So he's not done with the series whatsoever. And at one point, there was actually a Beautiful Joe TV series. It has 51 episodes. It was broadcast every Saturday over in Japan for a while between 2004 and 2005. And then it was broadcast over here on like WB Kids for a little while. They got through 20 some episodes before they canceled it. And if I'm not mistaken, you can find it to stream on Crunchyroll these days. Do you still use Crunchyroll, Rob?
I certainly do, Dave.
Yeah, so if you ever were curious about the Beautiful Joe cartoon, it's on Crunchyroll, I believe.
Well, I'll have to give it a check because I did not actually know there was one.
So, returning to the Capcom 5, let's talk a little bit about what they did for the gaming industry. Each subsequent release of another Capcom 5 title just proved to Capcom more and more that the GameCube was a failing console. I mean, frankly, none of these games really truly sold very well on the GameCube. It never took off, never had the player base. Let's be honest, the PlayStation's through first and second eras just spanked all the competitors. So I think what GameCube sold 20, 30 million, and the PlayStation 2 sold 150 some million, or some stupid discrepancy like that. Don't hold me to any of those numbers, but it's ridiculous.
Quality over quantity, Dave.
No, okay. Through this whole ordeal, Capcom learned and they really changed their business principles. They learned how to streamline development through creating all five of these games. And most importantly, they learned to focus on multi platform releases. And it was kind of, in a lot of ways, the end of exclusivity for Capcom titles. But if we're going to look back, the Capcom 5 really isn't as important for what it was as what became of it. These titles became the basis for for games that we still play now. So, for instance, PN03 was the inspiration for Vanquish, which was a halfway decent title, and it's frequently called the spiritual predecessor for Bayonetta, which is a very big series. We're about to get a third Bayonetta game on the Switch. Actually, we'll talk about that in a hot second. And of course, Resident Evil 4 ended up being ported over the PlayStation and became a really big title. No joke. I'm pretty sure because people get excited whenever there's a new version of Resident Evil 4. I'd argue that it's one of the favorites in the series, depending on when you were introduced to the series. It plays from an over the shoulder perspective. That over the shoulder perspective was kind of new, and it's been used in many games after that. It was popularized by Gears of War. That whole franchise uses that same perspective. The Batman Arkham franchise uses that whole perspective, so we can thank Resident Evil 4 for the way those games play. And it was one of the earliest titles that had laser dot aiming. That's the when you aim your weapon, there's a little laser dot, and this was designed as an alternative to lock on targeting that's used in many games. And laser dot aiming is copied in many big games. Dead Space uses it, and the Grand Theft Auto franchise uses it, which is a huge one. And for better or worse, Resident Evil 4 also changed the survival horror genre. It's most noted for being less about the horror and more about the action. For years after Resident Evil 4 came out, because it was so popular, the survival horror genre was definitely more action and combat based as opposed to the earlier games, which were more stealth, survival, and puzzles. So Resident Evil 4 was it was a very notable game, and it started here with the Capcom Five. After creating Beautiful Joe, Hideki Kamiya worked as the director of Okami. Rob, have you ever played Okami before?
Negative, Dave. That's not a familiar title to me either.
Oh, Okami is a excellent, excellent game. It's a mix of action, platforming, puzzles that really borrows a whole lot from the Legend of Zelda series and puts it together in a really beautiful, I mean, really truly beautiful and unique art form and style. After Okami, they shut down the studio. At this point, it was Clover Studios. Clover Studios worked on the other Beautiful Joes, and they worked here on Okami. And after Clover Studios was shut down, Hideki Kamiya moved on from Capcom. He worked at some other studios, but eventually he helped found Platinum Games. Here, while working with Platinum Games, he helped create Bayonetta, which we kind of just talked about. And he is the producer, if I'm not mistaken, on all three games in the series. So that's his contribution to gaming nowadays is Bayonetta. Are you a Bayonetta fan, Rob?
I actually have never played any of the Bayonetta games, Dave.
Oh, I would think you'd really like them. They were genuinely, truly up your alley.
All
As
I know is that I despise Bayonetta because it was really difficult for me to play against her in Smash.
well, it as a Devil May Cry fan, you would very much like Bayonetta. It's very similar and uh, wildly awesome. It's the story. It's kind of the same universe that like supernatural gods and demons and heaven and hell type stuff. Bayonetta is very similar. So Kamiya has also worked on Astro Chain, The Wonderful 101, which was another superhero game he made, World of Demons, and earlier this year they made a shooter game called Soul Crusta, which has a really kind of funny story. Last year for April Fools, they announced Soul Crusta as an April Fools joke, and then a year later they released it as an actual game. That's not so much of a joke. It's a decent game.
I
Also,
thought you said Soul Crusta, like crust, and I thought it was
yeah,
funny, but I realized it's Soul Crusta.
yeah, weird name. The Sun Cresta, Soul's Sun.
Oh, that makes sense now when you put it into perspective.
From 2013 to 2017 at Platinum Games, Kamiya was also the director on Scalebound. Scalebound was a game that I was stoked for it. It was just really cool. It actually looks a lot like what Horizon Zero Dawn turned into, but not robots, but like dinosaurs and monsters and stuff like that. So I don't know. I guess that gameplay style, but more like Monster Hunter or that's probably the best way to put it. But in any case, they hyped it up a lot, gave us a lot of really cool gameplay and video stuff, and then I, I don't know what happened. I didn't dig into it, but in 2017, Microsoft canceled Scalebound. And currently, Kamiya is working on something called Project GG. It's the last in what he calls his hero trilogy. So, Beautiful Joe was the first game, and that was all about one man transforming into a hero, while his second game, Wonderful 101, was all about a team transforming into heroes. And so Project GG is going to be the third game in the trilogy where you are a giant hero, and all we know is it's a similar concept to the other two. Probably a giant hero who's not a hero who's transforming into a hero, because that seems to be his MO. So yeah, we're gonna get a third game that's related to these from Platinum Games. Of course, I mean Bayonetta's right around the corner, so that's probably what they're working on. And that's Beautiful Joe, the Capcom Five, Hideki Kamiya. Hideki Kamiya has some other really interesting parts to his life, but those are game specific. The story of our Resident Evil 2 is kind of wild, to be honest with you. And we did the original Resident Evil, but we haven't done the second one yet. I've been saving that one.
Indeed. And 4.
And 4 and
And
Devil May Cry,
3.
they're all related to one another. Yep, yep, yep.
Oh, spooky, spooky.
I don't
Well,
know.
Dave,
I
I
don't
guess
know.
that if people want to find out when we talk about those, or like, you know, any other game we're going to talk about, there's probably somewhere where they should go.
Yeah, Rob. We post a calendar of all of our upcoming events from now till the end of the year on our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Also on memorycardlane.com, you can find my research notes. You can find links to more information on the games. I frequently post links to playthroughs for the games. I also have a biography on there and links to our Discord where you can join our community and tell me I'm wrong about something and come play games with us. So don't forget to hit that community button. There's also a little button where if you want to submit your own memories. So if you look at that calendar and you're like, "Hey, you guys are doing, uh, what are we doing later, Rob? I don't even know. Why am I drawing a blank? I made the calendar. We're doing this game, and I have a great memory for it. Hit that button and give us the memory." God, that was the worst plug in the world.
Oh, there you have it, folks. Dave has devolved.
I know. It was honestly the worst plug. I mean, but look, so let's some games we have coming up, um we're gonna do Turtles in Time next month sometime. You love Turtles in Time.
I sure do, Dave.
Uh we have a Mario Kart episode. Y'all are bound to have great stories about Mario Kart. We're gonna go do Command and Conquer later on in the year. I know some people that listen to this that I know have played Command and Conquer with me. We're gonna look at the origins of Fallout and Grand Theft Auto and Assassin's Creed. We got a lot of heavy hitters from now to the end of the year, y'all. I'm sure. I am sure that y'all have some really great memories about any of those titles. So click on the calendar. Under each one is a button that says share with us. You hit that, you fill it out, you zip it to me, and I'll read it. Well, Rob will read it. We'll share your memory instead of someone else's. So I want to hear from you. So you can also find links to our social media. I am on various platforms as David is wrong. Rob, what are you doing these days?
I can be found twitch.tv/FATBOIRIPZ.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, at the top of each episode, we tell you that each week we like to tell you a story. This week's story was about Beautiful Joe and Hideki Kamiya and Capcom 5. In telling you stories, we hope to teach you something new about the game, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. As part of telling you stories, we also like to admit that we learn things too, because when you teach, you learn. That's why I like to do this, to be honest with you. I learn new things every week. So, as part of our commitment to you, we like to go roundtable and talk about our biggest takeaways. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, Dave, I learned that there were a Capcom 5 in which I only knew of two of them, which is surprising
Resident
because,
Evil 4 and Beautiful Joe.
yes, yeah, very good, very good.
I'm surprised a little bit that you never stumbled across Killer 7. I guess I'm not. It is the best game that no one ever played, but it's a super cool game.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, assuming that these were all around the GameCube time and being in the GameCube, I really mostly just did Pokemon and Mario games.
Yeah, same.
So, I mean, if they happen to be other games for the GameCube, I just never got to play them. And obviously, Resident Evil, I always played on my PlayStation or Xbox when it came out for that. So, yeah, no, it wouldn't be surprising that it didn't cross my vision, my gameplay.
Fair enough.
But it's also very interesting to know that the guy who worked on this worked on a lot of other projects, and I mean, even Devil May Cry. That's actually really cool to know that Beautiful Joe essentially had some kind of influence in my favorite game series.
Vice versa.
Wow. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Inspiration. Beautiful Joe was the
Yeah.
well, yeah. Devil May Cry gave way to Beautiful Joe, which gave way to Bayonetta. So it's kind of the in between. You you can see him progressing down this route. You see a lot of him in his games. But then he got, it's Sushi Inaba here, and Inaba said, "Here's my superhero game," and brought the men in mass and spandex over to. I mean, let's be honest, that's what Beautiful Joe is, right? A superhero in spandex and a mask. So,
Absolutely.
uh, my biggest takeaway was something I didn't actually add to today's episode. Um,
What do you mean, Dave? You're telling me that you held out on us?
I didn't really hold out on us, but like as I'm sitting here thinking about what my favorite thing I learned from doing research on this episode, I in hindsight realize now that it didn't really have a place in this episode. Um, Growing up, I was a very big Power Rangers fan, and Power Rangers was a um, basically its creation was it took footage from an old Japanese tokusatsu show and it filmed American actors reacting to it, and that's how they made that show. And I never knew. So basically, all the big giant monster fights weren't actually made for Power Rangers. They were another Japanese TV show, and I never knew that before doing my research on tokusatsu. So
Wait, you're talking Mighty Morphin?
I'm talking Mighty Morphin, yeah. The,
No
orig- the
way.
original series. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, they took footage from an old Japanese show and they interspersed it with new footage from America with the American actors. So,
What? That's
and
crazy.
in hindsight, like it
That's now
makes.
my favorite thing to have learned from this episode.
I mean, in hindsight, you can see it. You know what I mean? Like when you go back and when you go back and you look at it and you're like, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? Like I absolutely get it. It's just kind of fun. That's it. It's kind of fun.
That's awesome. I mean, to be honest with you, Dave, that I grew up watching that because of you. Still love Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers theme is actually I have a heavy metal version that I thrash out to every once in a while on the drive home.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, it was. What show was it? Um, do, 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 do. The show adapted stock footage from the Japanese TV series Kyoru Sentai's Ranger, which was from 1992 1993, which was the 16th installment in Toei's Super Sentai franchise.
Those were attempts at words, Dave.
I know. Basically, it still stands. They took that stuff. So, anyways, that was my favorite
Wow.
thing that I learned.
Yeah, easily mine too. Now that's incredible.
So, I mean, if you want to make me pick something about the game, I really never knew about the Capcom 5. That was all new for me. And it was kind of fascinating learning where it came from. Not so much where it came from, but what it did for the industry. And that it literally led to Capcom redoing how they approach video game development. So, it's kind of cool to see cause and effect like that as we research and learn about video game history. So, all right. Well, on that note, Rob, before I take it out of here, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
Well, Dave, as always, I do want to take just a very quick moment to say thank you, thank you to each of our listeners. It means the world to us that you are here, and we hope that it gives some meaning to you.
Very true. Very true.
Very true, Dave.
Yes.
Back to you.
Thank you so much. Well,
I
Rob,
like who. Ha ha ha.
next week we're going to tell you the story of one of the games that is frequently cited as one of the hardest video games of all time. Created by Tokaru Fujiwara way back in 1985. Ghosts and Goblins is a run and gun platform game originally released as an arcade cabinet. It has a very, I wouldn't say well known, but it has a rage inducing twist to it. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to talk all about that next week. It started out as an arcade cabinet, but it was later ported over to the NES, where it sold like 1.5 million copies. No big deal. And generate a few other games. So we're going to talk about Ghosts and Goblins series. We're going to talk about the game and the series as a whole. We'll talk about its creator. So it's going to be all the ghosties and all the goblins. So join us again next week as we take a boxer underwear clad trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skip bop doobity wha?
What?